Hello and welcome to part 2 of 2 videos about postmodernism with a specific focus on the work of Jean Baudrillard, as he is one of the theorists in the theoretical framework of the A-level media studies. Now in the first part of this we focused mainly on the different features and characteristics of texts that might be considered as postmodern, and we're going to move on in this second video to understand the main points of Baudrillard's simulations and simulacra theory, and to also consider the application of this theory to media products, and of course with half an eye on the set media products as well. First of all though, a few questions about the media and realism or reality. So a few questions just to ponder, maybe a little bit philosophical in some ways, but Baudrillard was a philosopher, so it seems entirely relevant. So first of all, these questions. In your opinion, how detached is media from reality? Okay, and what examples can you think of where you would say that there is a quite clear detachment between media and reality? Second question, how can we apply these ideas to the notion of celebrity when it comes to realism? Are there arguments to suggest that we actually shouldn't consider celebrities as real people and rather perhaps a collection of media products? Next question. This might feel like it's a language or semantic question, but for you, what would you say is the difference between the idea of representation and simulation? Okay, because we talk about representation as representing events or people. Well, what's the difference between representing something and simulating something? And then finally, what happens when real people begin to simulate the representations of celebrities that they consume? Okay, so we're all aware that celebrity culture is prevalent. We know that real people, or perhaps the audience, see some celebrities as role models, as icons. Well, what happens then when we see the real people, the audience, trying to simulate the representations of the celebrities we see? Do we get even further from realism? So there you go. Heavy salad to start us with. What do you think? Have a go. These are all really opinion-based questions, so it's worth thinking about. This is the man himself, Jean Baudrillard. He was a writer, a philosopher who concerned himself with postmodernist theory, and he wrote about this in his book, Simulations and Simulacra. He believed that the media saturation that proliferates our society means that we're living in a kind of hyper-reality where nothing that we have left in society can actually be considered as real. Instead, all we experience from the media is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Well, you get the idea. Okay. There are some brilliant people online making lots of cultural studies videos, so I'll hand over to one of those from 8-Bit Media to explain a bit more about Baudrillard's work.
In light of recent events concerning newscasters being lost in the fog of memory, it may be pertinent to ask, can we trust the news media? For proclaimed priest of postmodernism, Jean Baudrillard, it isn't lack of access to information that renders the news meaningless, it's the proliferation of images that makes it so untrustworthy. Depending on where you get your news, you'll see evidence that climate change is a myth or a serious problem. Enough searching reveals that Paul McCartney is really dead. Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landing, and 9/11 was an inside job. If you look hard enough, you can find the contrapositive, underside, or opposite of any event. These multiple interpretations don't make the world more accessible. The explosion of information, of events, makes the ability to understand the world nearly impossible. The camera lens makes every image suspect. War is reduced to theatre, disease into telethon, hunger into magazine covers. It makes the most atrocious events questionable. Every image is possibly staged, recreated, simulated for a political end or to push a product. There are hundreds of news channels, all competing for viewers, followers and hashtaggers. Media and advertising operate on the same wavelength, and as a result, the line between reality, marketing and news is nearly impossible to discern. Media outlets and advertisers compete to keep people glued to their couches, perpetually titillated by the explosion of content on the screen. It's the selling of a lifestyle, a promise of access to the truth as something to produce meaning. It's why reporters appear at the scene of crimes, embed themselves with military units during war, and stand on the banks of oceans during hurricanes. The signs of disasters are images to be consumed. While our lives may be utterly boring and meaningless, the nightly news reports that there are in fact places where things take place. It sells the promise that meaningful things do happen. They broadcast stories of actual events, but far from giving viewers access to the world, the media creates a copy of an event. They create non-events, Xerox copies of reality that are easily ingested by a society that has been trained to accept advertising, suggestion, and disinformation. For Baudrillard, we're complicit in this disinformation campaign. People willingly choose deception. The masses want to be tricked, fooled, and distracted from the reality of their lives. Simply put, we prefer the copy of reality. In the world of social media, we are no longer passive spectators. We interact, create, and dictate news. We are the screen, the editor, reporter, and subscriber all at once. So, dearest viewer, if Sylvester Stallone is in the Boxing Hall of Fame as Rocky Balboa, and if people still believe the lie that wrestling is real, how are we ever supposed to find out if Paul McCartney is alive? Greetings, beloved viewer, and thanks again for watching 8-Bit Philosophy.
Okay, some interesting ideas and thoughts there from the people at 8-Bit Philosophy on Baudrillard, explaining his work. And like with everything else to do with postmodernism, it can tie you up in knots, it can feel very strange, and it's meant to, I suppose, undermine your whole experience of reality. But I guess it's kind of possible to understand, really. Either, I suppose you can go two ways with this. Either it seems inevitable that when we live our lives experiencing the world mainly through screens, through representation, that actually it seems reasonable to suggest that any concept of reality is now as far removed as possible. Or it might be an incredibly difficult and bitter pill to swallow, because so much of our reality does arrive via a screen that maybe it's even harder to understand. So let's have a little bit more of a closer look at how Baudrillard says this happens. He describes this as 4 phases of images, but for our context or our argument, we can consider, I suppose, an image, if you like, to be a media product, perhaps. Anyway, here's what he says. First of all, that the image will be the reflection of a basic reality. Then he says what will happen as we progress through representations and copies of copies is that the image will mask and pervert a basic reality. The next phase of images, he says, is that image then masks the absence of a basic reality. And then finally, we will get to a stage with representation where the image will bear no relation to any reality whatsoever. It is its own pure simulation. Now, we can apply this to representations in the media, but I'm going to use a slightly left field example to try and explain this, and I can't take credit for this analogy. I believe it was another media studies teacher that came up with this idea, but apologies if it wasn't. the analogy I've seen to explain Baudrillard's four phases of the image or of images is using the humble orange. Okay, a fruit that grows on trees, not in climates such as ours, but in warmer places, high in vitamin C, with a pithy skin and a juicy, fleshy interior. This is an orange. I'm sure you knew that without being patronising. So let's take the image as a reflection of basic reality, because I suppose this is an image of an orange, just to make things further confusing. Okay, so let's take something that oranges are used for that is a step away from the orange itself. Something like orange juice. You know, it's no longer in its thick, pithy skin. The flesh has been pulped to a point where it is just the liquid form. It's often encased in a glass rather than a skin. And so this is still ostensibly everything that came from an orange. But it, if you like, masks the sort of, and perverts the reality of what an orange is in a way. Then, of course, orange liquid is transformed into orange drinks, or should we say orange flavoured drinks. Something like Fanta, of course, likes to pretend that it's orange, and whilst it may well claim in the ingredients that it contains some pure orange, we know that drinks like this are mainly water, quite a lot of sugar, various other E-numbers and chemicals that we've never heard of or don't know the meaning of. So, in a way, what we could say is that this is a version of an orange that actually doesn't only pervert or mask the basic reality, it's actually masking the absence of a basic reality. You know, it's trying to hide the fact that this is really not a lot to do with an orange. It is just kind of using our associations, if you like. It's using the connotations that we have of oranges to remind us of something before. But really, there is an absence of that basic reality. The vast majority of that is definitely not come from the fruit that we mentioned before. What about the fourth then? The image that bears no relation to any reality whatsoever. Pure simulation. Well, I guess we could look at products such as these glorious items, the Terry's chocolate orange and orange boiled sweets, which may resemble in colour or shape something that may have used to have been an orange, but of course in reality is nothing more than sugars and chocolates and flavourings, and really bears no real resemblance to the original reality at all. This is pure simulation. So yeah, that's how an analogy that's always stuck with myself in terms of this. The not so enviable job is to pick a media text that attempts to represent some kind of reality and then works through Baudrillard's four phases of the image. I will give you a hand with this, just in case analogies of oranges don't quite trigger off a kind of the thoughts as to how you can apply this to media. Okay, but hopefully that will help some of you understand the four phases of images. I will give you an example of, I think, how Baudrillard's work can be applied to the media in one of the oldest, if not the oldest, television soap opera of all time, having recently celebrated its 60th birthday. And that is the amazing and wonderful Coronation Street. A soap like Corrie can be thought of in this way if you chart its history. Because historically, and when it started all those years ago, the purpose of Coronation Street was to be a gritty social document. And it has evolved through to the present day. So as I said, you know, the purpose of Coronation Street was to show how working class life on the cobbled streets of a city like Salford, how how life was, how the people that inhabited that life, the work that was going on. Because a lot of television was filled with newsreaders that had received pronunciation, the Queen's English, were all from the home counties, well educated, from sort of middle class existences, and that was kind of that's all you saw on television. So Coronation Street was devised as a way of trying to give us a slice of life, give the audience a touch of the reality of working class life. In fact, broadcast in 1960 originally, at that point colour television was available. I mean, it was in its relative infancy, but it was something that was a choice. And actually, interestingly, the decision to make Coronation Street black and white was a stylistic one rather than a financial or industrial choice, because it was felt that actually making it black and white would make it feel more real, more gritty at that time. Now, if we look at that as being a reflection of basic reality, Baudrillard's first point, this is a representation that reflects Salford in the 1960s and working class life. But of course, it's a manufactured TV show. It's filmed with cameras on a set using actors. So of course, actually, whilst it may be an attempt to reflect working class life in Salford, every episode that was made, even in those early years, was really masking and perverting a basic reality. These weren't real people that, they may have been inspired by real people, but the characters themselves weren't real people. The dialogue and dialect may have been similar to what was spoken and the conversations that occurred in working class Salford, but they were written by someone else. So they were masking and perverting a basic reality. They weren't a reflection of a basic reality. But what happened to these characters? Well, they took on a life of their own, really. Their storylines grew, evolved, got interwoven with other people's lives. The characters may have originally been based on people who were real, but they became much loved and took on lives of their own. Corrie was a soap that I watched growing up in the 1980s and 90s, and the character there you can see is the brilliant Hilda Ogden, played magnificently by an actress called Jean Alexandra. And she was a real caricature. She may have had traits and attributes that were recognisable, but altogether she became a stereotype, an archetype, and, as I said, a caricature, larger than life. And it was great. She's a great character, and the soap over its 60 years has enjoyed many of these. However, by building these caricatures, by basically trying to create characters that replicate what they've done in previous episodes, you are taking an even further step away from the reality. And so what happens is, as these big characters and as the show is really trying to repeat its own success rather than to try and recreate that realism, the image or the text is really masking an absence of a basic reality. That reality that the show may have been founded on is getting further and further away, and actually there is an absence of it, and the show is now masking that absence. And so if you watch a soap, and you may have noticed this about other soaps, whilst people say it's based on a realism, many soaps these days bear no relation whatsoever to reality. We have storylines involving kidnappings and murders. We have explosions. We have characters who carry out a string of secret affairs, who suffer terrible illnesses and come back from the brink, a million times. And all of this kind of ridiculous melodrama that's over the top, far-fetched, trying to beat other shows in the ratings. We're talking about one street that has had explosions and fires and tram crashes and robberies and sieges, and These things don't happen to one little quiet street in a back pocket of a working class area of a city, a northern city. But it doesn't matter, because that's not what the show's about anymore. It's about entertainment and, trying to beat itself as well as other soaps. But we do get to that fourth stage of the image, where the image itself bears no relation whatsoever to reality. It is its own pure simulation. So, can you find or think of a media text that in some way has attempted to represent an element of reality, but has got to a stage now where that reality where that media text bears no relation to any sense of reality and is its own pure simulation? It doesn't have to be a TV show, but it can be if you want. Could be a franchise of movies. It could be a video game. It could be magazine, web-based, any media product you want. Give it a go. So whilst Baudrillard has written lots of different things about simulations and simulacra, reality and hyperreality, here are the three main points that the exam board require us to kind of really be able to get our teeth into and to understand and be able to apply to the set media products as well as unseen products in component 1. So first of all, the idea that in a postmodern culture, that the boundaries between the real world and the world of the media are collapsing, and that it's no longer possible to distinguish really between reality and simulation. And sometimes that's easy to see. Maybe it's a bit harder to swallow when we look at things like the news, or social media, but that's his theory. He also says that the idea in a postmodern age of simulacra, we are immersed in a world of images which no longer refer to anything real. Well, do you know what? It's really quite hard to argue against this point that we are immersed in a world of images. How much of your life is spent looking at a screen, even if that screen is trying to represent something real to us, a person's life, a place they've been to, or even images of your own life, memories, nostalgia. But he does go on to say that those don't actually refer to something real. That might be easier to understand if we think about the various filters that people put on their own photographs. And thirdly, the media images have come to seem more real than the reality they're supposed to represent, and he calls this a hyperreality. And maybe this is the biggest step to take and the one that might be hardest to kind of get your head round or even to kind of buy into, because of course you don't have to believe what these theorists say every step of the way. You can challenge them, but you can also, I think, for the sake of like a little bit of thought experiment and experimentation, agree with them, go along with them, see how far that takes you. What would you say? What would be your proof that the media is now more real than the reality that it's trying to represent? What does that actually mean? Where can we see evidence of hyperreality in our society? Well, undoubtedly one medium that is very useful to look at when studying postmodernism is music video. And of course it is prevalent, postmodernism is prevalent across a range of different types of media, but perhaps the best examples come from music video, which has always lent itself to creative use of visuals, playing with genre boundaries, sometimes even using satire to discuss issues surrounding politics, gender, or even the music and media industries itself. Added to which, the evolution of music videos have seen a greater self-awareness, not only of their own constructed nature, but of the constructed representations of the artist themselves. Whilst other music videos aim to construct a reality that bears little resemblance to the truth of the artist or the music industry as a whole. So I picked a couple of examples of music videos, just screenshots here, images. Top one is a 1990s music video called Buddy Holly by a band called Weezer, not the Weezer, they're called Weezer. And this was a music video that used a certain amount of computer-generated images to insert the band into the set of a sitcom called Happy Days. Okay, so playing around with genre, playing around with pastiche. And the interesting thing about this, of course, is that whilst Weezer were a 90s band, finding their ways through camera wizardry and editing in a 70s sitcom, the 70s sitcom itself was a nostalgic look at 1950s culture. Okay, a TV series made in the 70s, set in the 1950s, being visited by a 90s band. Okay, all kinds of things going on there. A mashup of 1950s pop culture, rock and roll, the teenage experience in a 70s sitcom format with a studio audience and all the kind of traits and tropes that you would expect from a 70s sitcom, suddenly being bombarded by a 90s American rock band. This is pastiche. It's maybe a little bit of parody. It's certainly homage. All of those things we talked about in the first video. And the second screenshot you might be more familiar with is the Taylor Swift video for Look What You Made Me Do, which features a number of different Taylor Swifts in various guises and her incarnations throughout her career, to the point where the final scene sees numerous Taylor Swifts all appear on stage together. Again, bit of pastiche, certainly a big spoonful of self-parody, and definitely self-reflective in its awareness of being a music video. So what I do is think of a music video, or find one that you could consider as having postmodern features, and deconstruct what's there and why it's there. You can choose one that you know or one that's unfamiliar, but here's just a quick reminder of the things that you can look at or look for from the first video. Satire, has it got something to say, using any of the above to make a point? Parody, what genres does it parody and how do you know? Intertextuality, what's referenced, other text, why are they there? Homage, is this video a tribute to something else or another work of art? Is it self-referential? Does it play on ideas of self-representation, or does it even send up the idea of the music video itself? And pastiche, does it blur the lines regarding genre, or does it blur the lines regarding even different types of media, and what conventions are used? So find a music video you know, or one you don't know, that could be considered postmodern, and analyse what's there. So let's look at some of these trickier aspects of Baudrillard's thoughts and enter the world of hyperrealism. And my case study for this, rather inevitably, is the social media platform Instagram. And Instagram is certainly a product of postmodern times. It is interesting because it is a medium which arguably tries to create reality of its users, of its audience base, who are also its encoders. But I'm going to use a case study that you may have been aware of, but hopefully not. This is called, what I've just called, the strange case of Amalia Ullman. So as I said, many would make the case that Instagram is a perfect example already of hyperreality. It's a simulated version of reality. It is really a selection of photos anchored by captions and hashtags, altered by filters, all to represent the reality, in inverted commas, of someone's life, which is reduced often not to all of their life experiences, but a series of medium close-up selfies or two shots of couples and photos of food to depict the complex mess that is being human. Baudrillard would almost certainly say that this way of representing ourselves is a real significant departure from reality, and therefore it would be a simulacrum. But because people use this to represent their own lives, it's often seen as authentic. People buy into this as being a realism. However, this confusion over is it real, is it simulation or simulacra, this confusion means that really it is nothing more than hyperreality. But look, that's not to say it can't be. Can Instagram ever be authentic or present the reality of a human being, their emotions, their fears, their hopes? What do you think? Can it ever capture what it means to be a person? Well, let's consider the case of Amalia Ullmann. This is Amalia's Instagram page, as was. Amalia moved to New York with her boyfriend and decided to start documenting her life on Instagram, where she went, what she ate, what she was doing. Her account was really a kind of diary for her life, as many people do use it for, and she accrued a considerable number of followers who, as expected, followed her story. Here are a few images from her story and her life. During the time she was on Instagram, she broke up with her boyfriend shortly after she moved to New York. She had a change in career direction, and she also very openly discussed and posted pictures of cosmetic surgery she considered breast augmentation, and asked her followers what their thoughts and opinions were of these things. And so her life was really an open book, and it was documented through images and captions and conversations with her followers, who responded. They supported her, they interacted with her. And in return, Amalia would often post short affirmations, and she positioned herself somewhat as a life coach. Now, I know sometimes the sort of kind of affirmations and maybe life messages you get on social media can be seen as a little cheesy, but I imagine they're a great support to many people. In fact, what Amalia has done here, is there an argument to suggest that actually this is the new authentic, that reaching out, even if it is for a medium like Instagram, whether it is posting photos of yourself or communicating via hashtags and images, is there an argument to suggest that this is the new authentic, sharing intimate ideas and thoughts, even if they're to people that you don't really know, sharing a life that is changing and evolving? Isn't that really as real as it gets? What are your thoughts on this? Is this the new authentic? Is this now reality? The problem is, with Amalia's story, is that none of it was real at all, or real in the sense that the character or her experiences were real. The account, the whole Amalia Ullmann account, was part of a larger art installation piece called Excellences and Perfections. Ullmann herself is actually an artist. She's worked within a variety of different types of media, and Excellences and Perfections was an interactive work of art that explored ideas that surrounding the media and reality, but also explored notions of stereotypes and representations of women, specifically regarding body image. So she collected together many of the images that she took during this period of time. They were hung in a gallery, as you would expect from works of art, but she saw this as kind of quite modern, and, as I said, as good art does, it explores ideas and themes and something relevant, and this is what she was doing with the art, creating a character. There is a curious aspect to the story as well that is always intriguing. One curious aspect was that even though Amalia Ullmann revealed that these photos were faked, in fact, she revealed how she took so many of the photos in exclusive restaurants and so on, though many of them were completely faked. Even though she revealed herself to be nothing more than an artist, or you could argue a fraud, actually many of the people who interacted with her account still continued to interact with the character of Amalia Ullmann as if she were a real person, as if that character who'd come to New York, broken up with her boyfriend, decided on a change of career, was helping other people as well as being helped. They continue to interact with her as if she were real. What does this odd twist in the tale reveal to us about a modern audience's relationship with the media? Is this proof of Baudrillard's thoughts, that actually now our reality is so far detached, is so constructed that we do live in a hyper-real world. What do you think? Okay, so a huge amount to digest there. And a lot of this is kind of, as I said, proper melon twisting stuff. So I've decided to finish this video with an overview of postmodernism from someone who really encapsulates, I guess, what the movement is, and is an example of someone who's come from that era. You're going to hear a clip of an interview with an artist and songwriter, I guess a comedian, a sketch writer, podcaster, video games player, called Blind Boy Boat Club. He's an Irish writer, and as I said previously, a comedian and songwriter who used to appear with another artist in a band called the Rubber Bandits, who had a hit song about 10 years ago that's often referred to as a parody song, but it's kind of not really, called Horse Outside, and released various albums under those names. Now, one thing that's noticeable about Blind Boy Boat Club is that he wears a mask made from a plastic bag, like a normal supermarket plastic bag. It makes his appearance look somewhat like a kind of American wrestler / Halloween mask. In fact, both the Rubber Bandits had. So anyway, he was recently interviewed by another podcaster and broadcaster and comedian, a favourite of mine called Adam Buxton, who appeared in the 1990s with his friend Joe Cornish in a show called The Adam and Joe Show, whereby they used to use their toys and from their childhood and other props to recreate famous films on a very, very low budget, kind of YouTube before YouTube existed. Joe Cornish went on to make films like Attack the Block, and Adam Buxton carries on making funny sketches and recording podcasts with interviews with very interesting people. So the first voice you'll hear is Blind Boy Boat Club, and I'll put a couple of images of him and the Rubber Bandits up as he appears. And then when Adam Buxton speaks, I'll put an image of him up, and also with his a picture of from his time with Joe Cornish in the Adam and Joe Show. And from then on, Blind Boy really describes what postmodernism is from his experiences and education studying a master's course at university. He studied art and history of art. And so I've added some images, because this was from a podcast, obviously it was an audio medium. So I've just added some images of some of the things and people that he's talking about. So hopefully where I may have not really, any gaps that I've left when explaining what postmodernism is, hopefully Blind Boy can fill in.
To do a master's degree. I did a master's degree in kind of internet memes and critical theory and stuff like that, as a way to understand art better at an academic level.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. And what kind of stuff were you talking about and reading about then? Because I was at art college in 1990 I started my degree, and then it was all postmodernism, Jean Baudrillard, sliding signifiers, all that shit.
Yeah.
Were they still talking about that kind of stuff?
In my master's, so I did quite a bit of Baudrillard in my master's around postmodernism, but the thing is, now what we refer, and it's something that informs my process at what I do, some people refer to what now is as meta-modernism. Mm-hmm. So for people listening, simplistic, modernism is post-industrial revolution. When we started to put faith in science, we believed that science and truth could solve everything. You know what I mean? It's like we had cars, we had flying, but then you start to apply science to things like housing. You build these big giant council estates and think, if we just put everybody there and give them this, everything will be okay. And then postmodernism happens around the 1960s, with the rejection. Well, before that, postmodernism would have started with Dada in the around 1916, but we see it coming to its furore in the 60s. It's where humanity rejects the sincerity of modernism, the faith in science, and then becomes ironic. But right now, they say that what we live in is meta-modernism, which is informed by the internet as such, whereby we have sincerity and irony existing alongside each other perfectly. And what I kind of studied in my master's and what I was interested in is I believe that because we live our lives scrolling through our phones, that what this has done is it's made us quite literate in being able to handle sincerity and irony at once. Because if you look at your Facebook feed, you could have your friend's wedding, then someone could share a horrible ISIS video, then you scroll down again and you've got some cats. And we have to be literate to do these things. And how I then tried to bring that into my own artistic process was, I have a bag in my head, I look like a fucking clown. But while also being a clown, can I speak about something as important as suicide or mental health with sincerity and allow the humour and sincerity to exist alongside each other at once in a type of fluxus? And that's what you'd call meta-modernism. And it's what people say that's what we're at right now. It's why you have people like Boris Johnson and Trump who are effectively clowns, but they're also politicians.
Give me an example, if you can, of some well-known pieces of modernist art, and then maybe a few pieces or artists who would exemplify postmodern.
Okay, so a good example of modernism, not so much art, but writing, we'll say. Mm-hmm. So the work of James Joyce. So James Joyce, Ulysses, is seen as one of the greatest pieces of modernist art. What you see with Ulysses that would make it modernist is Joyce, essentially, it was written around 1911, and Joyce was looking towards developments in science. So you had the new developments of the work of Sigmund Freud in understanding the human unconscious mind. Another thing with James Joyce is you had cinema. Cinema was an emerging new art form. James Joyce himself actually opened up the first cinema in Ireland. So Joyce is writing his book, and the way that language is written in the book Ulysses, Joyce sometimes isn't writing the words as they emerge from a person's mouth. Instead, what he's writing is how the words form in the person's head before they come out. So he's looking at stream of consciousness there. He's looking at the Freudian concept of there is an unconscious mind, that within your mind there are these unconscious forces that we don't fully understand from our childhood, from trauma, and these things inform what we say and what they mean. So Joyce was incorporating the human unconscious mind. You'll also see it in surrealism from around that period, surrealist art. Salvador Dali. Dali was looking at Freudian dream analysis and taking ideas from science, the sincerity of that scientific idea, and then applying it on the canvas. You'll see this with Impressionist fucking art, Monet. The Impressionists were the first painters who, like, the thing with painting is that oil paints were really complicated to make and they were cumbersome. But then when the Industrial Revolution came around it's been around like the 1700s, but when tubes of paint started to be produced around 1820, for the first time artists could leave the studio and bring a little easel and all these oil paints in tubes out into the field. And then what people like Monet started doing was looking at the new science of optics and looking at the science of light and trying to bring these things into their artwork. And what they were doing was responding to the challenge of the new invention of the camera. It's like, you've got a camera now, it can take photographs of reality. What can painting do? Well, what painting can do is you can look at how light works.
Yeah.
So those are all examples of modernist works, right? They seek the truth and sincerity in science and applying this to art. And then what would be considered to be the moment post-modernism, after modernism?
I mean, most people talk about Duchamp and the urinal.
There you go. Marcel Duchamp and the urinal. I think it's 1915, it'd be after 1916, because 1916 was Marcel Duchamp was a founding member of the Dada art movement, and they founded that in 1916. So I think it was like 1917 for the toilet. It was at the height of World War One. Now the thing with World War One, And the beauty of art in general, art always reflects the society that it comes from. So if you think of World War One, World War One was a very modernist war. It was a war of modernism, because what you have is war has been around since humanity has been around. War is not new. But with World War One, it was industrialized war. The machine gun, for instance, okay? Previously, you had a cavalry going against, it was kind of fair. But now all of a sudden you have this weapon that can kill hundreds of people in a second, or you have bombs that can do the same thing. So Marcel Duchamp, and this is why they say this is the birth of postmodernism, Duchamp's thing was, there is nothing as irrational and absurd as a gun that can kill 100 people, or a gas bomb that can kill 1,000. This is absolutely absurd and irrational, and people are dying. So therefore, I can't have any sincerity in my art. I must respond to the irrationalism of this modernist war with something equally irrational. So he said, I'm getting a urinal and I'm putting it in a gallery, I'm signing it, and I'm calling that art. And everyone's head exploded. It's like, what do you mean? Where's the painting? Where's the sculpture? This is just a toilet that you found, and now it's in a gallery and you're calling it art? And Marcel Duchamp was, yeah, this is art now.
And then why is it then...
Is that taking you back to college?
Yeah, well, I mean, your ability to recall all those things and to respond to that question is fucking impressive. Did you get good grades?
Right. Okay, yeah. Thank you to Blind Boy and, of course, Adam Buxton's podcast for that summation of it. I think it's pretty neat. Hopefully it helps you to understand these things a little bit more, or at least makes you inclined to do a little bit more reading about this, particularly that bombshell that maybe we've gone even past postmodernism now and we're living in an era of metamodernism where we are a generation, and I'm talking about you as a generation, that are able to kind of synthesize the authentic with the ironic at the same time, because you've had to adapt to this. But the main points here are the ones on Baudrillard. He is the theorist that you should be able to apply to media texts. Go back, revisit those bullet points, those three summarized parts of his work, but really any of the aspects of postmodernism that we've studied and looked at throughout these two videos are things that you can hopefully notice or spot or start to recognize in media products all around them, because they're so prevalent. Anyway, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again in the Theory Zone. Bye bye.